Eric, what's your evolution of race consciousness?
Well, that's a good question. So I've been reading ever since I was about 4 years old. So my mom would give me books even on race when I was five, because she wanted me to be aware of stuff like this. So I would say around 5 years old, and then just learning about the history of America and how people may perceive you. And of course, you get the talks about certain things because my mom made sure that we traveled and everything. So we would have those type of talks about certain things that we might encounter. So I would say, yeah, about 5 years old. And
Do you remember? Do you
what was the second part of that question? Like, what
No,
does
no,
it
no,
mean
no,
to me?
no. I mean, that's a start, right? That's a good start, right? So I'm kind of interested in the evolution from there. But I do have one question before you go on, which is, do you remember the first book or any impressions that you got from those conversations at such a young age? I'd love to hear more about that, and then kind of where you went from there.
First book that I remember, I don't remember the title exactly, but I do remember it was about Martin Luther King. It was some very like brief summary type stuff, that just cover the basics. Um, I do have radicals in my family, so I learned about the more heavier stuff too around the same time. Um, my dad loved the Malcolm X movie, so we watched that together. When I asked more questions, and my grandma was a card carrying Black Panther, so I would ask her questions about certain things. Um, but yeah, I don't remember the exact literature. I do remember attempting to read the Malcolm X autobiography, but at the time I was a little bit too heavy for me, and it bored me after the first few pages, and at that time I didn't have the mental wherewithal to get through that. But um, yeah, I don't remember any specific titles.
So you're getting a kind of education from family members who, have strong views about race. It sounds like, relationships to the civil rights movement and the Black Panthers, teaching you about Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, learning about civil rights icons, and you're doing that at a very young age. So, what's the next kind of stage in your evolution of race consciousness from being raised in that environment?
Um, to be completely honest, I don't think that it was that much on my mind. I mean, I grew up in California. I was born in Oakland, and I was raised in a small town outside of Oakland called Pittsburgh. And it was a very diverse city. I had neighbors that were, mostly Hispanic, but of all different types of races. And of course, as kids, you hear racial jokes, you make racial jokes, and we used to play around with one another about all that, and we just lived our day to day, and it wasn't something like where I confronted racism early, at least not on a impactful scale, I would say. And it wasn't on my mind much in my childhood, other than to learn about like how we got here as a country and in the world, like what did it mean to other people outside of the country? Because we would have students that would come in from all different places, and I would ask them about their experiences, and I would see their experiences. I would see how they're treated in school. I would see how they're made fun of, like their accents are made fun of, and then them becoming part of our school system and finding a home here. Um, but yeah, I would say my next step was just to keep learning, keep reading, and that eventually led to me to come to Georgia for my college years. So yeah.
All right, so college level Eric now. You've done a lot of reading and study over the years. It's not really forefront in your mind because you grew up in a diverse area. You know, people joked about race, but we're not really digging into the nitty gritty, and you're not experiencing, from your perspective, significant racism that's impactful. So, does college change anything for you? I mean, a lot of people have come on here and expressed that their journey to college did change their perspective on race. That was also my experience as well. And I'll tell you about that if you're interested to hear that a little bit. But I want to hear about you first, and then I'll go.
Well, so in California, I forgot to mention this. In California, I did uh, experience a couple of racist incidents. It's like there was a time where like I went into a store, routine, going in there with my brother to pick up some stuff from my mom, and it was just gonna go in, go out, and I think this is when the self-checkout stuff just came about. The self-checkout technology just came about maybe. And so we were doing that, and I remember a lady stopping me like right after like I just walked past the self-checkout thing, and she like grabbed my arm, and then not knowing who it was, I grabbed my arm away, and I was like what are you doing? And she was like, stop right there, like let me check your bags. And I was like, check my bags. I was like, what do you need to check my bags for? And then she was like, let me check your bags. And she started getting like a little loud and kind of making a scene. And I was like, okay. So it was someone who worked there. And, I had no problem with that because, I didn't steal anything. So I was cool with that. And see, she checked the bags, and she like called someone else, and then I noticed that she was trying to find something because she in her mind she was convinced that she saw something that was, you know like I don't know if they maybe experienced a lot of stealing, so they were just hype. I mean, like on alert about that. I don't know, but I told my brother, go get my mom because I knew that this was something. So he went to go get her. I'm over there talking with them. She gets the manager. And then I'm talking with her about the fact that, why am I being stopped? She couldn't give me a direct answer. She was like whispering to the manager. And then my mom comes in and asks, what's the problem? And then she, of course, didn't have an answer, then wanted to, play nice and then run away. And then made them, uh, my mom wrote a letter to them later on, telling them about my experience and how she, touched me and all this other stuff. And, they gave us a whole bunch of discounts and all this other stuff. And I think I'm not sure if they fired the lady or made her do some type of training or something, but that was one case where that I remember in California where it was, you know, uh, I think that it was a racist event. But here in Georgia in college, it was really interesting because I the first way hmm, I would say I first saw the racial dynamics being different than California through like how people talked about dating. Like the question of uh do you date non like black people? Like that type of stuff. Like do you date Latinas? Do you date white girls? Do you date Asian women? Like those type of questions I would hear often. And then I'm like, um, well, yeah, like I don't, that's not something that comes on my mind when it comes to, finding a significant other. So that was weird. And then also the ideas that people had of me because I was, well, one from California, but then two, black. I think that made me aware that it was different out here, but I never experienced anything like crazy. I would say if anything in California, I experienced crazier things. But yeah, I think college just opened my mind to like how the the racial dynamics were here and how people looked at race and even racism over here. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You know, we talk a lot on this show from people all over the world about this subject matter. So we've definitely uncovered that geography, right? Where you are, not just in the United States, but all around the world, is going to dictate to a certain extent your racialized experience, and it can make your racialized experience very different. Even people who are in close proximity to each other in the same country can have radically different racialized experiences. It's interesting to hear that for you, you did have that's a pretty significant encounter that you did have with you know I'm glad you remembered that because I'm curious. Okay, so I'm curious about a few things, but the thing that I'll focus on first is, did experiencing that, right? You've been doing all this study on the subject of race and racism. Did experiencing that change your perception of what you had learned about the subject matter? Or did you feel like you didn't learn anything greater from experiencing the negative consequences of, what you perceived as being the negative consequences of the racial hierarchy?
I learned that adults are very fearful. Like I've always been the type to be the one to not afraid to disagree with adults. I'm very disagreeable as a child, as a teenager. So I never had an issue with that. Like my dad, he's a Marine, right? So he used to teach me about hierarchy in terms of like social hierarchy and chain of command and all that stuff. So he built in with me like a respect, respect your elders, respect this, respect that. My mom, on the other hand, always built into me like speak out if something is wrong, make noise if needed, and all this other stuff. So she was like the opposite end of that, where she made me more, I guess, comfortable being opinionated very early on. Because the big scare in the beginning of the 90s was the whole like missing kids thing, like, so make sure you tell someone or scream or say whatever you need to so you don't get kidnapped by another adult while we're not there. So it was just a mixture of that. And I learned through that event that adults can be very fearful and very wrong and not be able to admit when wrong. Because I saw the embarrassment on her face. I saw the fact that when she didn't see anything that was out of the ordinary in my bags, I remember seeing the look on her face like, "Ooh, I messed up," and then not being able to be like, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought wrong. I thought I saw something, whatever." Like I saw her double down and really try to look for something and, you know, make up stuff. And I realized that adults do this just as well as teenagers do. So I learned a little bit. It didn't really change my views on race necessarily. It just changed my views on like uh, adults,
That's
I
kind
would
of
say.
interesting because I feel like if you follow that logical path, that it would necessarily change your view on race because ultimately what you observed was someone's fear leading to their creation of a continued delusion even after they saw reality. And that delusion could have put you in jail. So, I mean, I feel like if you follow that full thread, like it's a little bit difficult not to think, if that could happen and I'm just out trying to pop in and out of the grocery store, and now I literally could be in handcuffs the next second for no reason at all. Um, I think that that's interesting for me to hear that that didn't mean anything to you.
Yeah, I mean, that thought came to mind definitely, the weaponization of uh racism and stuff like that. But there are a lot of things that could have happened there, I don't know. I just didn't like I think of like multiple possibilities, I think of all these possibilities, and then on top of that, I think it's just knowing uh, I guess knowing how many people that I've encountered like that versus how many people there are actually like that. And then on top of that, start seeing that in different ways in other people. So it might not be a race thing that people are that they might double down on or they might believe due to fear. It might be a sexism thing, or it might be a lack of knowledge in a certain area. Like for instance, I remember um, having certain basketball discussions with adults and them doubling down on something that they were wrong about and all this stuff. So I started seeing that that that
The fallibility
inability
of adults.
basically, yeah, just to not be able to recognize their ignorance and then not be able to be intellectually honest about what they don't know.
Interesting, very interesting. Okay.
I guess it's very similar to maybe how women might look at sexism, and then how, like, when men ask, well, how do you know sexism? And how they feel and how they have to question certain things, and how it takes a little bit, you know, it takes a little bit more for men to really believe them, because they might not experience the same thing, or they don't experience the same things that women experience. Now, where I tend to, I guess, sort of have issues there, be it on race or about the issues of women or feminism, is, sometimes people are wrong. Oftentimes people are wrong. I've encountered, for instance, being in academia or being at some job where a woman would say, "Oh, uh, this is happening to me because of sexism." And then, when you hear people ask questions, and then what led to that, or being a witness of what happened and knowing more information, you realize that it's not that, and it's actually something else. Like, it could be something else, like maybe that guy is a butthole to everyone. He wasn't just a butthole to you. He didn't say anything that made it explicitly sexist, but you thinking that he treated you a certain way that was different from the men, it wasn't sexism. And that happens a lot of times when it comes to racism too. And I think people prematurely, because of their fears of death or being hurt because of a racialized event, they seem to jump to conclusions. And I guess that's where I'm often, you know skeptical of people's claims of racism and
So,
sexism,
so what would you
or
say?
any of that.
Yeah, yeah. So, what would you say to someone who said exactly what you just said to me, to you, about what you experienced in that grocery store? Like, what would your response be if they said exactly that? That, like, you don't, I mean, there's robberies all around. You don't know if they, what they saw or this or that. So, how would you respond to that? Like, it's probably not racialized. You're probably just imagining it. Like, I mean, I want you to try to think about, or like, I was there, I saw it, I didn't see anything that indicated it was racial. Like, all of these things could be said about the thing that you experienced that you believe was racialized. So, like, I just find it to be very interesting that, like, you have this skepticism, but in your own experience, it didn't sound like you have very much skepticism. Like, yeah, you leave yourself open, but you don't have a lot of skepticism. And so, like, um, it's just interesting to me that for other people's experiences, you keep this skepticism. Like, I mean, I'm sure you believe that you yourself can also be wrong. So, like, I mean, it's not like you look at yourself differently in that regard as anyone else. However, you did think of yourself differently as everyone else when you experienced that particular incident. That's what I'm trying to get at again. Like, we're kind of getting back to my point every time, which is that you thought that way about yourself, but you're not thinking that way about anyone else. And so, like, you're not giving people the same. kind of regard for their own ability to perceive their own experience as you gave to yourself. And
I
so,
disagree there. I disagree there. I disagree kind of strongly there because, first of all, again, I could be wrong about that thing, and I am skeptical about that. I do have doubt about that to some degree. If someone were to not believe that, oh, okay, like that's fine. I don't care. Like even if, like, let's say the manager didn't agree and didn't try to appease my mom and do all this stuff and things of that nature. Okay, like that's fine. There are
is it
things
fine
that
though? Is it fine? Because ultimately, maybe it would have been fine in that situation. But what about another situation where the fact that where someone where that might have negative consequences against you? I'm sure you can imagine such a scenario. So I don't think it is fine.
I mean, again, like we could always go to like the extreme examples of basically anything, but you know, uh, that doesn't justify that type of thinking of always going into extreme. This could happen, so
But what? But
therefore
wait, wait, wait,
we
wait, 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 wait,
must
wait, wait.
leave,
I didn't.
or
I don't think.
therefore we
I,
must act in this way. And
no,
it's
listen.
like
I didn't. I
it's
didn't.
just like
Hang
it's
on.
just
Hang
like
on. Hang on.
how
Hang on. Now, I didn't go anywhere like that. Okay, let's stick to what I said and where I went. So I didn't go anywhere about what we should. I didn't say anything about that stuff. All I said, right, is that like the consequences could have been
yeah.
negative. That's all I said. Is that the consequences could have been negative. Just like you open yourself up to possibilities, I'm just opening those possibilities up. I didn't say anything extreme at all. So I'm not talking about
Yeah, no, you
extremes.
said that I could have went to jail and stuff like
I
you
don't think
mentioned that
that's an
earlier.
extreme
That's
consequence.
what I mean by extreme.
No, but I don't think
Like
that's an
you did
extreme.
mention that
But
very
listen, I don't.
specific.
Okay, okay, okay. But do you really think it's me going to an extreme in a situation
Yes.
where you literally have police officers ready to arrest you for a crime? Like, I don't think you being arrested is then like an extreme in the scenario that you're describing,
Do you
right?
think that in every situation such as that at least or most people are arrested, especially if they're innocent? Do you think that most people are arrested? Most black people are arrested
I do
in
not
that.
think most. I never say anything like that. So like,
No,
no.
I didn't say you said that. I'm
Okay,
just
but why?
asking.
But why would you ask that? Like, it doesn't. It's not a logical question based on what I said. But like what? No, I don't think that most. Like, it's just not. Like, I didn't say anything that would lead anyone to ask that. I feel like, but like, no, I don't think most black people are arrested when they encounter a police officer. I don't think the numbers reflect that at all. Let's see. There have been some groups who were historically excluded from STEM. What are your thoughts on organizations that seek to increase diversity in STEM? What do you think about increasing diversity in STEM, giving the marginalization of and exclusion of historical exclusion of groups in STEM?
I'm for extending the access to STEM, like regardless if it's for race, sex, or whatever. Like I'm for uh, including more people in general because I just believe that if we tap into those Einsteins, and we tap into those Marie Curies or whoever. I mean, we could tap into those types of people more if we make access to it better. So if we get rid of the financial barriers, if we get rid of the educational system barriers, if we get rid of like any barrier that gets them there, because a lot of times one thing that I learned through my journey in STEM is that a lot of these people come from very affluent backgrounds, and they a lot of them have family members who were in STEM. Like they have a grandpa, grandma, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, all this other stuff that were into STEM. So, and I mean, when you think about it, sometimes, like, I mean, that could apply to a lot of things. Like, for instance, if your dad's in the military, your mom's in the military, there's a good chance that you might go to the military too. Not promised, of course, but I'm just saying, like, there's a higher chance of you doing so. So I'm for having more access to people in STEM. Now, when it comes to DEI efforts, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, I've been a harsh critic of that for many reasons. And I just, in my experiences and by uh, the literature I read on this and all this other stuff, I don't think that it has been. Well, let me say this first. I've worked with Black Girls Code. I've worked with different efforts to get people into STEM. You know, the Atlanta Science Festival. I've done things where I tutored kids and I helped them get into that. Thankfully, I've had a couple of people tell me, "Hey, I got into this college and I got into it because you were talking to me about some physics subject, and it got me interested in physics, and then that led me to chemistry, and then now I'm about to get my degree in chemistry. Thank you." And then stuff like that means the world to me, because that's a great thing. Um, and of course, like I think anyone wants to have that impact when it comes to the things that they're passionate about. But to me, DEI efforts, I don't agree with how they do so. I don't agree with some of their premises. I don't agree with um, uh, the. I don't think that their ends justify the means. Um, and I mean, we can get into the reasons why if you want,
I mean, I'm
but
kind of curious about, what you see those ends and means to be, because ultimately, first of all, I think we should clarify something first before we go down this road. Do you believe that people were excluded from STEM based on, their race?
of course, yeah, that's a yeah,
I mean, it's
that's
historical fact, but that doesn't mean you believe it, right? So, I have spoken to people who do not consider that whatsoever in this conversation. Because
mhm,
that's what people do. They make up their own realities in this context,
mhm.
and so it's very common. So I have to ask. But okay, so you accept the historical reality, but so then is it your perception now that things are kind of like equal enough that even if there's still exclusion going on, even if it's, kind of under the ground, that we don't really need to do anything about it?
No, I believe that we should do something about it. We should always do something about any injustice that happens, especially at an institutional level. But what I don't agree with DEI is about how uh big of a, like, I don't think, for instance, that I don't think that hmm, I know that there are issues depending on where you're at. Like, for instance, a woman in India could have an issue that a woman in the United States doesn't have as much. It may be there in some institutions in some small way, but in India or in some other place, she might have that issue a little bit more. And I've talked to, women where that was the case, where they'll say, "Oh, I want to study this, but my family doesn't allow me to," or uh, this this barrier is in my way, and so I have to study this other thing. So I know that those issues exist. I just don't agree on where those issues start the and how bad it actually is.
I think for me to understand better, I need to understand. And this is a question here by Alien Agenda. Can you delve into the specifics of what's wrong with DEI? I think most black people find parts of DEI cringy, but just want to fix it to suit us in our community. What's your? It's hard for me to understand what actual problem you have with DEI as it currently exists.
Well, I have an issue with, like, a lot of its premises. The premise, for instance, that you know that racism and sexism are behind a lot of the disparities that we see, that are either most or all of the disparities we see. I've heard people make those type of arguments before, who have positions of power
And you
you know,
disagree with that, huh? That's interesting that you would disagree with that, given you said you were unsure about some of the other things. Like, seems to be a conflict there, but like, what's your disagreement? You think the disparities are explained some other way? Because it sounded
I
like
believe that
you were
I believe that there
undecided.
are many. It's kind of going back to, our original conversation. I think that there are many more things to account for certain disparities and
Like what?
STEM and things. Um, we already talked about the fact that, you know, family and all the things. I think that when it comes to choices, you know, we have different choices that we want to. I mean, we make different choices in terms of like the things that we want to do. Like different groups have or tend to go towards different things. Like for instance, like if you were to look at like men and women, like what they choose, and of course, like we could say environment, we could say society influences them in this way or that
Well, I
way.
mean, we couldn't just say it like it's definitely true. So like, you
Some
know,
degree,
I
to some
mean,
degree.
right, but we don't know how much, right? It's going to be different for every individual, right? Like some people are going to make a choice that's less related to their environmental factors than others. It's going to depend on their personality, their level of support, their motivation and drive, external and internal, their level of resources, their ability to believe that they can accomplish it, their willingness to sacrifice. All like I mean, there's like you said, a lot of different factors, but I guess I'm still not understanding what any of that has to do with you not with you questioning the disparities being related to sexism and racism, given that you do believe in the historical exclusion. So it's and somebody else wrote, wouldn't the woman in India be a clear example of discrimination and sexism? So yeah, I'm trying to understand. It's not sounding like I'm trying to hear the disagreement, but it's very hard for me. I hear you saying you disagree, but then when you say what it is, I don't hear any disagreement.
Well, I don't get why someone would comment the fact that the woman in India is a an instance of sexism. I mean, like, yeah, but that doesn't prove a point that I wasn't making or that you're making. I was just, simply using that as a way to say, like, I know that this exists. Like, I never deny that racism or sexism exists. What what I'm skeptical about is the impact that racism and sexism have in, let's say, American society versus Indian society or
Well, let's
Chinese.
let's not versus, but let's just talk about American society right now, since that's where we both live. But like, um, what makes you skeptical of the impact of racism in American society? Why are you skeptical of that?
I'm skeptical of most things. I'm skeptical of our
Okay,
existence. I'm
but talk about
skeptical.
this thing. This is why we're here, brother. We're here, we're here to talk about
Yeah,
race.
I understand, but I'm giving you like the basis. Like this is like who I am. Like being skeptical about
So
everything
it's
that
part of your
I'm
identity,
feeling about.
basically. You're saying
You said it's part of my identity.
it sounds like that's what you just said. So that's why I'm
It's a
verifying.
part of my thinking toolkit. I mean, if you would consider that as part of my identity, then fine. But yeah, it's just part of my thinking toolkit.
Is it a permanent part, like that you just like always have, like you never believe you know anything? Is that how you operate?
That I never believe I know anything.
I'm trying to figure out where the line is, right? Because like ultimately, obviously, we have to exist and like believe things and like believe that we know things and whatnot. But obviously, in this context, the race context, it seems like I sense a significant hesitancy for you to take any position outside of like you do say that you believe in the historical discrimination, but like it's so weird to me when I have these conversations and I talk to people who agree about historical discrimination, but like somehow in the present, Like there's no connection between the past and the present. Like it's just like, yeah, that all happened for generations, but here we are, and like there's no discussion about like how that past influenced the present whatsoever, which is difficult when you're talking about something about like DEI, because that's the whole reason behind it, is because of past discrimination continuing into the present and the legacy of
But
that
it's not
discrimination.
continuing at the same rate, and that's the
I don't think
main
anyone. I
issue
don't
I
think
have.
anyone is
No, no,
arguing.
no, no. And I knew you were going to say that, but
No one
no,
is.
there are plenty of people who
No.
have that belief.
Name
Yes,
one.
there are.
Name one.
Yes, there are. There
Name
are
one
plenty of
person.
people. There are plenty of people in not only in academia, not only in entertainment, not only in industry, but all around the place that believe that it's pretty much the same as it was in 1960, 1970, even 1980,
I mean,
you
I
know,
have heard.
that nothing,
I have
huh?
heard that from people who grew up in those decades. Who lived in them, black
Yeah.
people. So
And
like,
I've heard from people who grew up in those decades that it's not
okay,
that.
so why would we just discount people who say that? Why is the default to be like that's crazy that they would think
But why
that?
would we discount people who don't say that? Like
No, I
that's the
don't. I
thing. Like we
don't.
have to we have to
I
apply we
don't.
have to apply this logic back like in both
I
ways.
literally said I
We
would
can't
not
we can't
discount
deny the
them.
experiences of people who disagree and
I
then
would never do
totally
that.
taking it. I just I'm just saying we can't
Okay,
deny
well,
the experience of people who disagree and
I
may have
agree. Yeah.
different viewpoint. And this is part of the reason why like I'm skeptical about DEI too. Is it's like it's about diversity until like let's say for instance when the issue of Asian discrimination in academia, and I would bring that up in 2014 when I learned like in detail about it, uh and people were saying like, oh no, like you're uh that's just I think how did people frame, I'm trying to remember how people framed it. Like that's a white supremacist talking point and things of that nature. Or and then when it comes to equity, how vague that term tends to be, because equity is supposed to be about fairness, but sometimes what people's idea of what fair is to them may not be fair to others. And then when it comes to inclusion, they want inclusion when it comes to certain things, but they want to exclude others, especially if you have ideological differences. Like, and that's something that I faced in the science communication world and with the feminist and science communication world, is how deep that exclusion goes. So if you, for instance, have questions or challenge DEI, I've seen people who said Black voices matter so much. Black voices are so important to DEI and STEM and all this other stuff. And then the minute that I disagreed, that some that women in STEM who were doing science communication disagreed, that the second that we started doing that, it was like an overnight attack, from the left leaning side of this belief, like that
What was the
fully believe
nature? What was the
in
nature
AI.
of the attack that you experienced?
Well, what do you mean? What was the nature of the attack?
Like it's very difficult. Like you're extremely vague. Pretty much most of what you said is extremely vague, so it's really hard for me to understand what happened to you. Like,
Yeah, ask me specific questions to get a specific
I
answer.
mean, you're telling your own story of something that happened to you, but like all you said is that there was a disagreement and then you were shunned. I mean, that happened. That could
No, I
literally
said
be
there's a
anything.
disagreement about DEI.
So what was it? Like, what happened? I have no idea.
So okay, so I there was a thing that we would do when we would get together as a group, and we would talk about different science communication tactics, like how we should approach this, how we should approach that. And I was on social media doing science communication even before it became like uh before it became I'm not gonna say before it became popular to do so because I remember seeing some people do it, but there weren't nearly as many like scientists or science-minded people correcting misinformation as there were like now back then. Like, like back then there were like a couple people mainly doing like I remember there was this woman called dang, what's her name? I'm not sure if it was her name was like GMO Babe or something. It was something to that effect. And there was Credible Hulk. Uh, of course, there was Richard Dawkins doing some stuff. But anyway, there was an archaic view of how to communicate science back then. And like I remember using memes, for instance, and people saying, "Oh, well, that might be unprofessional to some people or whatnot," because you take science communication courses to learn how to better communicate science to people, especially without using so much jargon and stuff. And I would still do memes and everything today. And now it's funny because like a lot of science communicators they use memes all the time. That's just one thing. But in particular, I mean, in talking about like what had happened, um, the the topic of diversity, equity, or yeah, diversity, equity, inclusion. At the time, it was like all about equality. Equity wasn't used nearly as much. Um, that was brought up, and I had a couple of issues with how they define those terms. I had a couple of issues with um, the the certain problems that they saw, like be it with women or with Black people in STEM, and how to address that. I didn't like how they interacted with people who disagreed or who had questions about that.
But what
You
was
know,
your question? What was your disagreement? What was your question? What exactly did you disagree with that they said about black people in STEM? What was it? I still don't know.
well, I was getting there, but to summarize, I guess, but my disagreement was that these disparities were mostly due to racism. That's the main thing, or mostly due to sexism, or or mostly due to homophobia and all this other thing. Like you go down the line of the
Okay. So,
isms,
like, what
but
was the foundation of that disagreement for you? Like, why do you disagree with those statements?
because of data.
So, you think there's data that disproves that somehow?
It doesn't disprove it entirely, but what I found is that there are other explanations that are more impactful than racism, sexism, and so on. And I mean, like one
What have you
regarding
seen? Yeah.
sexism.
Yeah. What have you seen
Oh,
to
sorry.
suggest that? I'm curious.
Oh, well, one regarding sexism. I mean, for instance, I remember hearing that there's uh, well, first, the idea that because a certain field or a certain thing is dominated by a certain group of people, that means that it's anti everyone else because of that. Like that automatic assumption to me, I had an issue with. But there was one specific thing I remember us talking about was like the faculty preferences, like the fact that there was a lot of faculty that were men, and that was due to the sexism. Now, of course, there's some evidence to suggest that, but I remember bringing up a study where it actually showed that in STEM, there's a 2-to-1 preference for women in faculty. And when I presented that, it was met with a lot of hostility, a lot of uh, like accusations of being a sexist, all this other stuff, and it just got really messy. And then
Yeah.
and that was also. Oh, did you say something?
I was going to ask you, um, what is that study? Do you remember?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I could link it
Yeah, I
to
definitely want to read
whoever
it.
wants to
Number
read
one, but the other thing, the why I stopped there was because I guess what was your intention in bringing it up? in that
My
context.
intention of bringing it up is because we casually had conversations about, these things. And again, uh, these are people who are dedicated to DEI and that whole thing, and them telling me that, or them making the assumption that there was a preference for men in faculty. And I was like, wait, like I remember actually reading something totally different, and that it said something different, and me bringing that up caused an issue. So that's why I brought it up. It was just, what we were talking about. Like, we talked about a whole bunch of things from, like we didn't just talk about science communication, but we talked about like how we were to or we talked about other topics like outside of that. We talked about politics and all that stuff. But yeah, that's how it came up.
That's I mean it's interesting. It's very hard to get a handle on it because like I mean it all depends on what the study was. I don't think you actually answered what your intention was in bringing it up, except for we were just talking. But you did decide to bring that up, you know, as opposed to something else. You could have said a lot of things. You could have said that, oh yeah, this is definitely an issue, right? Because you said you agree with that.
No, but that's the thing. Like if I had come across, if I had come across, and for just like how you said, like you know about certain things, and or you have beliefs about certain things, and therefore like you you may tell people, like, be it your experiences or about the literature that you read. That's the reason why I brought it up, because it was literature that I read. It was something that I was interested in, that I was curious in, because I wanted to answer these things for myself far before us bringing it up, bringing it to the table. Because I remember the atheist movement of I'm not sure if you remember, but like in the early 2000s, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and Christopher Hitchens, they would go around having these like lectures or talks and debates sometimes.
Yeah, I've heard them.
Uh, yeah, yeah. Um, and this started a movement. This started a movement that led to like people talking, like religious people and atheists talking on YouTube. And then that movement eventually went to uh, atheism and social justice. And then it got messy, and then that movement broke apart. I'm actually working on a book about that. But through that, I remember certain atheist people, they would bring up certain things regarding sexism and racism. And because I respected their opinions on certain things, I looked into them, and then I tried to, you know, disprove my own conclusions and disprove their conclusions, and that became like an exercise for me. Very young, actually, where I would try to do that, and that started from magic, because I'm a failed magician. Uh, in middle school, I wanted to be a magician, and I remember I remember believing that you could bend spoons with your mind, and then I started reading books, and then I came across James Randi's book about how it's actually done, and then I found out that they're tricks, they're illusions, and then that led me down this road of like debunking things. So I've always been interested in like trying to figure out counter arguments and debunking things, and yeah, that's a part of my framework, just with anything. And that probably starts from middle school, but yeah.
Okay. Um, I still don't really feel like I have a lot of answers about. Um, it sounded the most concrete thing that I can hold on to based on what you said is that you didn't like the framing that because even if you didn't like how people treated you from suggesting that they could be wrong. It seems like that is like a theme actually in this conversation. But like you were like, hey, there's this evidence that could show that that's not the case what you guys said, and then you were treated with hostility, and then I guess that turned you off from DEI.
No, it was um I had questions, comments, and concerns about things with DEI, such as like let's say for instance the trainings, the a lot of the trainings that they want people to do, like the what is it called? The I remember implicit bias training was one of the most popular forms of training, even though there's mixed evidence about that, even to this day. Back then it was so too, but now today there's even more mixed evidence about how effective that actually is. And I would ask just very basic questions about it, and it would get a very hostile uh, uh, remarks, and
Do you
and
think
it
you can articulate why people were hostile towards you, like a true reasoning for like that they would agree with for why they were hostile towards you, that they would
I
agree
don't
with?
think that they would agree with it necessarily,
Okay,
but
all
I
right,
do
that's
think I have
interesting.
an idea, and that's they're they're very dedicated um to these efforts. Like they do think that they genuinely think that these are really like important issues of our time, and that you know uh that they're bigger problems than I think that they are. Um,
It is just so
and
weird that you keep going
it's
back
that
to that.
religious, huh?
It's so interesting to me that you go back to that over and over, brother. That these
What?
problems are bigger than I think they are. Because it's very interesting to me because it's probably the most definitive statement you've made this entire time. That you feel sure about. That you feel somewhat sure about. But like everything
I have
else you're
varying
extremely
degrees of
skeptical about.
confidence when it comes to certain things. Like, Feynman says something to the same degree. Like, there's a quote I can't think of it. It's one of my favorite quotes on science. But he said I think he says he's something like he has uh varying degrees of certainty and he's not sure about anything or something like that. It's very similar to that, but yeah.
It may just be that posture that you took that was frustrating for people, to be honest, because in activist setting, I think that DEI can be clearly labeled as activism, even though you just like kind of characterize it as um, trying to reduce disparities. I would say it's like anti-discrimination, the same way the Civil Rights Act was anti-discrimination. It's an anti-discrimination movement.
I think it's pro discrimination in many cases. I think it is shown to be pro discrimination in many cases. I found
Well, just
that
because you're
when it,
discriminating, right? I mean, let me be more clear then. Okay, you're definitely discriminating when you are, uh, you know, looking at people's racial background or social background or class background or their ability to be ableist or not. When you're looking at all those things and you're making a decision partially based on that, that is discrimination. Um, but like I guess the question is, you're against that. You don't think we should. You think we should never take anything like that into account, or like pretend that we don't, because that's what it would actually be. So like, what's your perspective on that then?
I don't believe in the Kindian view of positive racism is a solution for negative racism. I don't agree with that.
Well, I don't
So
think he
I
said
think
that.
that
So
that has many
why don't you
limits in it.
why don't you say like your own words? Like he didn't say that. So like let's just stick to your own words, okay?
He
So
did say that.
no, you're misquoting him.
Yes, he did say that.
No. He said, okay. He didn't say
Okay,
positive
good.
racism. He didn't say positive racism.
Okay. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said that.
No. So I'm sorry. I did read his works. I have it right here. I could probably pull it and
I
read.
read his words, so
Okay,
go
well, he
ahead.
didn't say that, brother. He did say positive racism. That would not be a thing he would say.
We can review this.
Yeah, please do. But like ultimately, I want to hear from your own words, okay? I want to hear your original thoughts. I don't want to hear what you think someone else said and what you disagree. I want to hear what you think. Do you have like a firm thought or belief, or do you mostly just like juggle with other people's thoughts on it, or how do you deal with it? Do you like have something internally that you?
No, these are my own thoughts on it. I I don't believe in that. Like that is what I saw in the DUI. That's one of the main patterns I saw in the DUI thing of believing that positive forms of racism was a cure for, you know, negative forms of racism by what they defined as.
Can you
These are
give?
my
Yeah,
thoughts.
yeah. Can
These are
you?
not
Okay,
thoughts
okay,
by
okay.
anybody
All
else.
right, I hear you.
I don't
I,
like the way you painted that as someone else's
well,
thoughts.
you
Like
could.
I'm
You're.
just
I mean,
copying
you
and
were just
pasting
like
someone else's
continuously being
thought.
like, well, this person said this, that person said that. You've
That's
been
just
doing it through the
very
conversation, so I want to hear. I'm
patronizing.
more interested in your own personal experiences and your own thoughts that you've formed, like, not necessarily independent
And
from
my
anyone
personal
else.
experiences are based off of things that I read, but also me thinking about these things.
Yeah, yeah.
And just because I quote from someone something doesn't mean that it comes from someone else. Like as I'm using their belief to have an opinion or to be skeptical about this. And only that, you know, it's just not what it is. And that's just one of the issues I had with you in the beginning of, you know, when we had our Twitter disagreements is you would do that often, and I've seen you do that often with other people, is you assume that because we believe this thing that you believe to be so wrong, that it must be because you're copy pasting from some idea uh contrarian to it. And then that's just not the case.
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't trying to. I didn't say any of that. So, like, that's not what I was trying to do. Okay, what I said was that you misquoted Kendi, and which is true. And you could
No,
verify.
it's not true.
Okay, you can verify that on your own. But once I'm found to be correct about it, then please go on Twitter and you can let me know. All right, you can DM
Definitely.
me. But like, no, 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 no. It's not about that, brother. It's just that like, there's a lot of conflicts between the things that you're saying. So, like, one of them is that, like, you're a skeptic, but not on this, not on that you know something about the magnitude of how much racism is occurring. For some reason, you
Well,
believe that you know better than other people. I mean, that's
yeah,
what.
just because you're a skeptic, it doesn't mean that you don't you don't lean one way or another. You can still be skeptical. You still have varying levels of degree of certainty when it comes to certain things. So just because I say that I'm skeptical, or just because I leave room open for something else, or just because I might lean towards this and say the data seems to show this, that doesn't mean that I'm saying that in no way, shape, or form that you could be right about, or I could be wrong about this, or they cannot be right about this. I'm not saying that at all. Never said that.
Yeah,
You know,
what you are
uh,
saying, right, is that you don't think that we should use discrimination as a tool to give people opportunities. Isn't that correct?
wait, you were breaking up. What did you say?
I said what you are saying from my perspective, and I want you to verify whether this is correct or not, that we shouldn't be using discrimination as a tool to um, to oppose bias, to oppose racial bias or other
No, I'm not
biases.
saying that.
Okay, so you
I'm
do
saying
think
that
we?
that shouldn't be the only or the main thing that you're using. That shouldn't be that it shouldn't always be the starting point, especially. I think that that could lead to many horrible outcomes in terms of your goals and getting people in there. And it could lead to a certain thought process that makes one a little bit too passionate to the point where they exclude others because they don't believe so either. And then that's what I've experienced myself.
It's just okay. I mean, I hear you about your experience. I feel like the story you told doesn't necessarily reflect what you just said there as having been the experience. I wish I knew more. I kind of wish I knew more about what you experienced because like
What do you want to know about it? I mean,
Um, I
I
mean, like I
faith.
was asking before, I was trying to get more details about like what specifically y'all disagreed about. You say you disagreed about some of the definitions about equity and equality. I just like to know more about what those specific disagreements were. What could possibly lead people to be that toxic about what you had to like? It's just hard for me to understand what could have happened. Like based on the story you told so far, it doesn't make any
I'll tell
sense.
one very specific example just for you. So one specific example is what happened with James Damore at Google. Do you remember that?
Say that one more time. Who?
Do you remember what happened with James Damore at Google? The Google
Uh,
memo controversy?
I mean, there's something at the edge of my memory, but I can't remember. I just remember the name basically, and that's it.
A quick summary. So basically, this is a Google engineer. They were having meetings on diversity, equity, inclusion, and how to include more people into Google. And, in these meetings, they asked for suggestions, comments, concerns, like most DEI efforts tend to do. If you ever been to one, I mean, sure, like maybe most people, or maybe they have, I don't know, but I've been to a lot, and they usually ask for questions, comments, and concerns. Um, but so he gave questions, comments, and concerns, and his possible solutions for including more people, while also making suggestions that it might not be, or the reason why, let's say, more Black people aren't at Google is because of racism, or why more women are in these certain engineering positions are because of sexism, so on and so forth. And that caused a conflict internally. Internally, this memo got out somehow. Like, I'm not sure if someone from the DEI department leaked it. Internally, because it was going around in the company first. It started like a firestorm, and then it got out to the public. And then when it got out to the public, and there were many people commenting on this, and many people calling it racist and sexist and all this other stuff, it became a problem. And then he ended up getting fired for that. And I actually read the memo, unlike 90% of people uh, who were talking about it at the time in STEM, because again, he's an engineer, so that's the reason why we were talking about it in this. And then it became a huge story too, and then the STEM world, uh, and me saying, "Wait, I don't think that he was being racist, like you guys are saying." That caused an issue. Or when I said I don't think he was being sexist, that again, that caused an issue. And that issue eventually went to them leaving crazy comments, getting me out of certain groups, like stealthily, like kicking me out of certain groups. It led to people calling my job and calling my school and doing this and doing, like, it just really petty stuff, and that incident let me know that there was a issue of tolerance for the differing viewpoints, and that diversity, equity, and inclusion didn't mean anything if you don't agree politically with people, which I found was a bigger problem than just racism and sexism. That's why I started talking more about that than I would racism or sexism, is because I think that the ideological issue that people have, and that intolerance that people have for differing views, and the lack of being able to come to the table and have conversations, um, those things are bigger issues of our time.
Okay, that's interesting. I definitely can't agree with that. I definitely think that is certainly an issue of our time, but I don't think it's remotely the biggest issue. Like, it's not killing anyone, and there are millions of issues that are killing a lot of people. So, like, like not millions, but like, there's a lot of other issues. So, like, I mean, I just feel like Yeah, I can't agree with that. It's the biggest issue of our time, but also it does look like um, there's more to this story. I'm reading about it right now, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's pretty. There's a lot to it. I think that him being a person on the autism spectrum plays a role in it. I think that even he thinks it does in his own words here. I'm reading his own writings on it. Um, it looks like also that he did advance some literature that said things like women have higher levels of neuroticism that could contribute to the lower number of women in jobs in tech, stuff like that, which I would call straight up sexism couched in scientific language. Um, so maybe you don't believe that. Maybe if you saw a study that said women have higher level of neuroticisms, you'd be like, oh yeah, definitely. But like for me, if I read something like that, I just automatically am like, you're not measuring neuroticism. Like that's pretty clear. So, you know, so I think that there's at a minimum a possibility that you defending that guy for people who actually knew that he supported statements like that could have come across as you supporting sexism. And I don't think that that's unreasonable to say or to think that someone might perceive that. So just to give you
No, no,
like,
I think you're right in that terms that people might perceive that, but just because they perceive that doesn't mean that that's the case.
oh yeah,
It doesn't
but it could be the case.
like that.
But it could be the
Yeah,
case,
it
right?
could be the case, yeah,
Yeah.
but it could be the case that they're wrong too.
Yeah, yeah. Either way, either way. I don't think they are wrong in this situation, right? Because unless you,
Yeah, no, no, I don't think that they're. Yeah, I mean, I understand. I understand your framework, so I understand how you're going to look at this situation. Yeah, I've had just like you've talked to many people and you watch them be. I've talked to many people on this, and I understand the different arguments they have, how they break it down, and it all depends on their political and uh, other frameworks for how they view things. Do they view things in an oppressed dynamic? Do they are they hardcore conservatives? Are they far right or are they uh, liberals or left leaning? And how they might view things in a totally different way. Like I understand the different types of frameworks people use to view these things, but the reaction to to this thing was far overblown. And you know again, you could perceive this however you want, but what to me, what has happened to him and how people reacted to that, um, it didn't do anything good for DEI. It made it look like a cult. And the last thing I would say is, I wanted to say this much earlier. One of the biggest issues I have with DEI activism and social justice activism in general is a lot of it isn't self corrective. I understand that me being in science, I'm so used to, you know, the fact that science is self corrective, and I prefer systems that self correct. Um, I, when I look at social science solutions, and then when problems arise and it calls for correction and they don't self correct, that I get really annoyed or I really dislike that, and that puts me off, and it makes me more skeptical of them if they're not willing to self correct when it calls for that. So I think whatever we choose, it just has to be self corrective. It has to be tolerant to feedback loops. It has to be tolerant to other people. Um, and it has to look at things from all sorts of angles and not just a racialized lens, not just a lens of sex, not just a lens of race neutral politics, but it has to look at everything and take everything into account in order to change things for the better.
all right, well, um, I think, thank you so much, by the way, for sharing your thoughts with us. I think that for me, the only thing I can really agree with you on that is that we do need to continue having the conversation. Pretty much disagree with everything else that you said. Like, I think that, DEI would claim that it's doing exactly what you described we should be doing. And I think there's a lot of evidence of that, even in the language of DEI. Like intersectionality is literally exactly about that, what you just described. So, like, it's kind of funny to me that you described that that's what we should be doing. But like, I mean, at the very minimum, we need to continue having conversations. For me, I feel like I could do a lot more than that. I am going to have conversations publicly like this virtually, but also live and in person, giving people a chance that they rarely get to discuss the issues. Yeah, I think so many things that you said just then um, have an intersect have an intersection with racism that complicate your beliefs. And so, you know, I think when maybe I'll go back over that what you just this part and just like kind of make a list of the different things that I think that you said that are complicated by the issue of race and racism and how those complications manifest because I think that might be useful. But I definitely want to have you back on to read some science literature on the subject and just read it together, take a look at it, see what we both think about it, and just share ideas. Okay.
No,
Um,
I'm done.
cool. Cool. Well, thanks for being a part of what I'm trying to do to continue the conversation. And yeah, let's plan to in the future have another one, maybe in a couple months or something.
Sounds good. That
Cheers,
would be
brother.
perfect.
Well, thanks for such a long one. This went 4 hours, so
Oh,
yeah, I appreciate you sticking it out for that long. That's really good. I did find it valuable because um, even though for me it was a little bit difficult to understand exactly what you believe, to be honest, like I feel like I have an understanding of your concerns about the present state of affairs with DEI and stuff like that. I don't really have a clear vision of the future or what informs your vision of the future aside from being against what's happening now, which I don't think is a really good foundation for prognosticating about what we should do for the future. But like, I do hear your vision of something that's radically different from what we have now that is more holistic in the way that it looks at the issues. So I don't think you would get a lot of pushback from someone who had something like that, but I'm not sure what that would be or what it would look like or why that would be an improvement even. So, but it's a start. We've started our conversation. We started sharing our thoughts. I appreciate the thoughts, and I'm looking forward to sharing more with the scientific research that people have done on the subject, brother. So, thank you.
thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate you. Again, I just wanted to say that I did not see your message before,
No,
like,
I know
because you
that. I
said,
knew that it was unresponded to. I figured you
yeah,
didn't see it. So like, but like, I was gonna hit you up again once I saw, like, so I was like,
yeah.
you know,
No, but you kind of got at me on Twitter, like I tried to do this, and you and like as if I was like avoiding you or something like that. And I was just like, oh, come on now, like I
nah,
don't
brother. When
blame.
I sent you that message,
And
when I sent you that message, like I was much smaller than I am now, and like I wasn't expecting anyone to come back at me. That wasn't my intention. So I'm sorry if that was how the tone came across, but that wasn't my intention. Okay, so
oh yeah,
but I'm
I see.
glad that you did agree to come. And yeah, I want to have you back. All right.
I appreciate that. I would love to be back, and thank you again. I hope you keep doing what you're doing and having these conversations because they are productive, and I've learned a lot about you, and so I can't wait to learn more.
Ditto, brother. All right. So I'll see you next time. Have a good night. Okay.
All right, you have a good night too.
All right.